Hi, everyone. I'm Michael George in for Vladimir Duthier. We are watching all the news happening in the U.S. and around the world. If it's happening on these monitors behind me, we will bring it to you live. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following for you this morning. A deadly terror attack in New Orleans on New Year's Day has left the city searching for answers. Where the investigation stands and what we know about the attacker. At least 15 people were killed in the truck attack on Bourbon Street. What we're learning about the victims. And a Cybertruck explodes outside Trump Hotel in Las Vegas, why law enforcement officials are investigating it as a possible act of terrorism. This is CBS News 24/7. And we began in New Orleans, where the city's police department superintendent is sharing new details about the deadly New Year's Day attack. Ann Kirkpatrick told CBS News her department is aggressively pursuing possible accomplices, as it's believed the attacker did not work alone. Now, officials are expected to hold a news conference 1 hour from now. But right now, we want to turn to CBS News national reporter Katie Weiss. She is live in New Orleans. Now, Katie, I know you just finished interviewing the superintendent a short time ago. What new details are we learning?
Well, good morning, Michael. I learned a lot of new details, actually, this morning in my one-on-one interview with the superintendent of police here in New Orleans. She had quite a bit to share, especially about her aggressive search, as you mentioned, for accomplices this morning involved in this attack. But she also spoke very candidly about her impressed emotions, her gratitude for her colleagues, who she says act so heroically during this incident yesterday. Take a listen.
Our officers and staff are heroic. They engaged an enemy. They engaged an evil man who was intent to harm, hurt, and destroy. That's what a terrorist is. They were out for destruction. And they ran to him and engaged. And even after that man was shot, they administered and others administered aid to that man.
Wow.
That is who they are.
And at this hour, she says that both of the officers that were shot during that attack, she says they are doing much better. They're both in stable condition. And she says that one of the officers may have already been released from the hospital, if not yet, will be released soon. So that's certainly some very good news amid this horrific tragedy.
Yeah, that is great to hear, Katie. Now, we've been hearing from the beginning that law enforcement believes this suspect did not act alone. What do we know about the search for possible accomplices?
Yeah, so I also spoke with her, if you didn't know, about some of New Orleans' recent beefing up of security in preparation for the big Super Bowl that's coming. The French Quarter here and into the Central Business District where the Superdome is, they've installed all sorts of cameras, hundreds of cameras. It's a very comprehensive security camera network system that even uses AI technology to track down bad guys. She says that system has been incredibly useful and helpful in their investigation, that in fact those cameras also helped police to track down some of the explosive devices that were found in the French Quarter after the attack took place. So certainly a very useful device, but regardless, despite all of those visuals at basically every corner in the quarter, she says they still need help from the public to track down whoever may have helped assist in this attack. So if you saw something, if you know something, do the right thing and call authorities right away.
And Katie, I want to ask you, I know you are from that area. How is that community doing this morning?
Michael, I think everyone is still very shocked, concerned, worried. You know, there is a big game coming up today with the Sugar Bowl. It was postponed. It was supposed to have taken place yesterday. So a lot of people still on edge about, you know, is there still a risk? Is there still a danger that they need to be concerned about? Ultimately, the police chief told me today, or police superintendent rather, told me today that she is assuring the public they can be at ease. They are doing everything possible to essentially make New Orleans the securest city in the country moving forward for today all the way through until the Super Bowl, when New Orleans will be expecting even more tourists here. Michael?
All right, Katie Weiss, who has been on the ground since the early stages of this investigation, thank you. Now, President Biden has committed all federal resources to the investigation, and he described the attack as, quote, despicable. He addressed the nation right after the attack.
To all the families of those who are killed, to all those who are injured, to all the people of New Orleans who are grieving today, I want you to know I grieve with you. Our nation grieves with you. We're going to stand with you as you mourn and as you heal in the weeks to come.
And we want to bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. He's got the latest from the White House. Scott, thanks for joining us. What are the latest details we're hearing from the president?
The president was the one who put some connective tissue between the attack in New Orleans and the attack in Las Vegas, saying during his Camp David news conference that it's under investigation whether there is a connection. The president returns here to the White House from Camp David midday and has two public events in the afternoon, which gives us an opportunity to try to press him for the latest on any connections found by federal investigators, but also to press him about what he meant and what he was referencing when he said last night that there were social media posts from the attacker in New Orleans that showed ties to ISIS. Those social media posts have not surfaced publicly, so we're interested in finding out what's behind those. The president is speaking on this investigation as the FBI, the Federal Bureau, is lead on the terrorism probe in New Orleans and has raised the possibility that there are accomplices who've yet to be caught. The FBI, of course, Michael, also playing a prominent role in the investigation in Nevada.
I also want to ask about the House Homeland Security Committee, and Louisiana officials are meeting this morning. What do we expect out of that meeting?
Well, there are Louisiana members of Congress who'd like to get some sense as to the ongoing nature of the threat in New Orleans and throughout that region, because there have been references to accomplices, to others being involved, and others have not been arrested. So there are going to be questions asked about whether it is safe to resume normal operations in the French Quarter, about having the Sugar Bowl, not in the business district, but elsewhere in New Orleans. What's more, there are always the broader questions, Michael, when you have these federal Homeland Security and FBI officials. Do you need more resources for this investigation? Does the federal government need to provide Louisiana with more resources to better ensure and steel the security of New Orleans? These are things that come up in federal briefings, and we expect not only the Homeland Security officials, but the Department of Justice to be pressed on all those matters.
Now, Scott, I want to ask about this. Senator John Kennedy was pretty openly critical about the transparency in the investigation. Talk about what he said in the reaction to that.
It wasn't just the striking nature of what he said, but the setting in which he said it. John Kennedy says that he wants the FBI to be transparent and honest with the American people about their investigation in New Orleans, and that he will apply pressure if he thinks they are not. There has been some distrust sown into the FBI by Donald Trump, by Trump's allies in Washington, by Trump on the campaign trail, giving that type of cynicism a platform at a news conference about a mass attack, an historic attack in New Orleans, raised the profile of the issue, but also raised concern among the FBI surrogates here, by Democrats, that was questionable timing by Senator Kennedy to bring up those questions in the wake of a tragedy. We'll continue to monitor what he says on the issue, what Trump says on the issue at the FBI briefings continue through the day.
All right, Scott MacFarlane at the White House, thank you. And President-elect Donald Trump is reacting to the deadly attack in New Orleans, as well as that Cybertruck explosion in Las Vegas. Let's bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. He is in West Palm Beach, Florida. Ed, first off, what has been the response from the president-elect?
Well, Michael, good to be with you. He has issued a series of Truth Social posts through the evening into this morning, and essentially making the point, I told you so over the course of my campaign, and the Biden team took their eye off the ball. Overnight, or just this morning, saying, with the Biden open borders policy, I said many times during the rallies and elsewhere that radical Islamic terrorism and other forms of violent crime will become so bad in America it'll become hard to even imagine or believe. That time has come, only worse than ever imagined. Joe Biden is the worst president in the history of America, a complete and total disaster. That's a slight modification of what he was saying yesterday. Yesterday, around this time, it was all about how alleged foreigners were coming into the country to commit crimes. Of course, we've learned that the suspect in this case is a U.S. citizen and a military veteran, so he's adding radical Islamic terrorism to his concerns about crime now that we know that the guy may have been inspired by ISIS. Either way, signals that he's upset about this, as everyone is, but also suggesting, as other Republicans had started to yesterday online, that perhaps this is because the Biden administration had not been focused on potential terrorist threats, and some Republicans making the argument, including his former campaign manager, that if the Justice Department hadn't focused so much and spent so much time and money on election interference cases, maybe those resources could have been diverted to avoid situations like this one. Michael.
Now, Ed, I want to ask about that because President-elect Trump is taking shots at President Biden. We're in the middle of America being hit by a terror attack. There's a transition of power between these two administrations. Are they sharing information?
They are, and this is a very important point to call out to viewers, and I'm glad you mentioned it. We got indications during the day yesterday that the Trump team here in Florida and the White House were in touch from very early in the morning about what was going on. And earlier today, Mike Waltz, who is set to be President Trump's national security advisor, said that he'd been in touch with his counterpart, Jake Sullivan, who, of course, is the White House national security advisor currently, about this situation. They continue to get information. What Waltz also said was like, look, we're relying on the White House, but we're also trying to obtain our own information. That's interesting. But either way, both sides are talking. And this is exactly why experts who have worried about the fate of presidential transitions and saw how poorly it went 4 years ago when we were going from Trump to Biden say that you need to have the outgoing and incoming teams talking to each other because these kinds of things happen and the new team needs to be up to speed on them. And so far, at least, indications from both sides are that there has been that sharing of information. We should also point out, while you and Scott were talking there, he's at the White House. The White House said that President Biden will be holding a meeting around 12:15 Eastern with his Homeland Security team to talk through what happened in New Orleans yesterday. So we may get more information at the federal level from the White House, from Homeland Security after that meeting, which, knowing Biden, can run a while. And we'll also try to get indications then throughout the day whether after that meeting information is also being shared here with the Trump team in Florida or those that may already be in Washington getting ready. But either way, yes, this has been a good sign, a positive sign for those concerned about transitions to see the two sides talking and sharing information.
Now, Ed, turning to the Las Vegas incident, we can't ignore the fact that this happened outside of a Trump property. Has the president-elect commented on that incident?
Yeah, and again, in a Truth Social post overnight, he suggested that if they hadn't been so focused on election interference and me, as he said in all caps, perhaps they would have caught this thing, saying in part, the DOJ, FBI, and Democrats, state and local prosecutors have not done their job. They are incompetent and corrupt, having spent all of their waking hours unlawfully attacking their political opponent, me, rather than focusing on protecting Americans from the outside and inside violent scum that has infiltrated all aspects of our government and our nation itself. So again, this was an argument we started to see some of his supporters and prominent surrogates make yesterday online during the day. Now he's making it, and it'll likely continue to be a talking point going forward, even though, as we said, the two sides continue to share information and cooperate as the transition continues.
All right, Ed O'Keefe from West Palm Beach, thank you. And now we want to bring in Anna Schechter. She is the senior coordinating producer for CBS News Crime and Public Safety. She joins us now here in Studio 55 for more on the attack in New Orleans. Anna, first off, thanks for joining us. What are the new details we're learning about this suspect?
Sure. Well, we've learned that he was working at Deloitte he had a good job, making about $125,000 a year, an annual salary. And we know this from divorce filings that he filed from a 2022 divorce. And so in those filings, we see that his former wife actually filed a restraining order against him and that it was granted and that he was not allowed to make threatening statements to his former wife or about their child. We know he had 3 children, according to these documents, 2 from a previous marriage. And so the implication is that he was having financial troubles, that he couldn't make payments, that he was tens of thousands of dollars in debt. So this is all new information just from a couple of years ago that point to some recent difficulties in his life. We reported yesterday he had some brushes with the law, minor issues, theft, driving without a valid driver's license. But really, we're homing in on the last 2 to 4 years when we believe things started to unravel.
And I think the big question so many people have is motive. Why did this happen? Do we have any evidence that points to the suspect's potential motive?
Well, yes. The biggest pointer is the ISIS flag that was attached to the back of his truck. And so investigators are homing in on anything that points to his allegiance to a foreign terrorist organization. Biden said last night that there were social media posts, videos in which he pledged allegiance to ISIS. Now, we have not seen those. We were scouring all day yesterday, looking through social. We have not seen posts like that, but certainly the ISIS flag is an indicator, and so investigators are interviewing anyone that might have been an associate, that might have been an accomplice or pushed him or encouraged him, gave him financial support or tactical support to know how to carry out an attack like this.
All right, Anna Schechter, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Of course.
A cyber truck explodes outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. We've been talking about it all morning. Coming up, why police are looking into a possible connection to the truck attack in New Orleans. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Well, today the FBI and Texas law enforcement are scouring the home of the driver who killed 15 people in the New Orleans truck attack. Right now, we want to bring in CBS News correspondent Jason Allen. He's got the latest from outside the home in Houston, Texas. Jason, what are investigators looking for?
Well, Michael, first I want to tell you, this is a new vantage point that we're able to bring you now for the first time. As authorities have been investigating here over the past, 18 hours or so, they had blocked off most of the access to this area, and so we've been looking at it from the back side. But now as they have wrapped up their investigation and their search here, really in the last 90 minutes, we've been able to get just a little bit of a closer look. And so this is the property that they were focused on, a couple of mobile homes here on a street that is mostly made up of fabricated homes. It does have a gate at the entrance that has now been opened up. Really, you asked what were they looking for when they were here. I think we can divide that into a couple of different things. One, they were looking for any elements of danger, and we could tell that based on the SWAT presence that was out here in the overnight hours and the early morning hours, right? A very heavy presence with armored vehicles, SWAT from the Harris County Sheriff's Office, from the FBI teams, and they were very, very cautious in their approach to their property, just based on what we saw happen in New Orleans yesterday, and flying drones up above the property and just being very careful as they approached it, going through a vehicle that was on the outside first before they then made their move, we assume, into the property in the interior of the home. Once they got in there, they would have been looking for any more evidence, right? Any materials that led them to any idea of the planning process that went into this, maybe potentially others that were connected to this, anything that helps them further the investigation. So those would have been, I think, the two separate things that you could look at as they were approaching this property in the overnight hours.
Now, Jason, we've been talking all morning about how this has impacted the people in New Orleans. How are people in Texas reacting to the developments here?
Yeah, great question. And, you know, I think it's interesting on this street, Michael, right? There's maybe a dozen homes, 14, 15, very, very quiet. We've only seen a couple of residents maybe venture out and peek their head out, obviously wanting to stay away from all the attention that is now focused on one of the homes in this neighborhood. And then contrast that with what we really saw in the late afternoon and early evening hours as this was all happening yesterday. And especially when you had that large law enforcement presence with those armored vehicles, that attracted a lot of attention and a lot of curiosity. And we saw people coming from neighborhoods around this area kind of come over here and focus on this space to see what was going on. I think there was some shock, some surprise that what happened in New Orleans could have the connection here, and really everybody wanting to know, where did this come from? What was happening here? Obviously, those are answers that we are hoping to learn from investigators as the day goes on today.
All right, Jason Allen, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. For more now on how the New Orleans community is reacting, I want to bring in Louisiana State Representative of Orleans Parish, Delisha Boyd. Ms. Boyd, thank you so much for joining us. We want to talk about how people are doing in New Orleans. What are you hearing from neighbors, from constituents in the wake of this horrible, horrible attack?
First, thank you guys for the coverage you have had of this incident here in New Orleans. And, you know, my constituents, neighbors, friends, family members, are in a grieving process, and that's a process of going from fear to anger to calmness, trying to tap into their own spiritual faith to get us through the next step, the next phase of grief. We are a resilient city, however. You know, we've come through many tragedies in the past few years even, and we will stand together and unify and come together and help our citizens understand that we are safe here in New Orleans. I'm so impressed with the first responders here, with the New Orleans Police Department and surrounding parishes have also stepped in. Our state police now are on site as well. We are safer now than we've probably been ever.
Now, you talk about the resilience in this community. The Sugar Bowl is today. The Super Bowl is coming up. There's Mardi Gras. So many big events in this city. How do you come back from this and keep people safe as you welcome thousands and thousands of new people in, hopefully to celebrate peacefully?
You know, as I stated before, we have faced tragedy in this city and come out stronger together. I think that our local officials, our state legislators, and as well as our federal partners are doing everything that we can to ensure not only our residents, but visitors that are going to be coming in for these major events, the Sugar Bowl, Super Bowl following soon, as well as Mardi Gras. We have huge festivals here with Jazz Fest. We want our citizens to know that we are safe and we are doing everything possible here to ensure their safety and to also make them realize that we are creating a safety net for them.
And speaking of that, the governor declared a state of emergency in the wake of this attack. What does that mean for folks in your area?
Well, you know, the governor was already planning a state of emergency for these major events that were coming forward. I think him implementing it now should also create an air of safety for our residents. And some people have left, but not necessarily because of what transpired yesterday. Some people have flights that were leaving out today because the game was supposed to be last night. So I think with the governor taking his stand, with calling the state of emergency earlier, bringing in additional law enforcement to our city, they have done a clean sweep of that area around the Superdome. They've added additional barricades and safety measures and dogs to sniff out bombs. We are ready for this Sugar Bowl. We're ready for the Super Bowl. We will be ready for Mardi Gras as well.
That is great to hear. Delisha Boyd, we want to thank you. Our thoughts are with you and the people of New Orleans. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the coverage you've had on this as well.
All right, authorities are looking into a potential link between the attack in New Orleans and the explosion of a Tesla Cybertruck outside the Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas. That incident is now being investigated as a possible act of terrorism. Andres Gutierrez in Las Vegas following this story for us. Andres, thanks so much for joining us. What's the latest you're learning from the scene, and why is this being investigated as a potential terror attack?
Well, Michael, out here right now, there is a sense of normalcy being restored here almost 24 hours since the explosion outside the Trump Hotel here in Las Vegas. Right now, there is a visible police presence. The mayor saying that there will be a heightened police presence along the strip here for the next 2 days. The Cybertruck itself was hauled away in the overnight hours. Forensic techs spent several hours last night and throughout yesterday processing it. We're told that in the back they found large mortars of fireworks, gas containers, as well as camp fuel canisters. That Cybertruck being rented to 37-year-old Matthew Livelsberg from Colorado. That's what we're being told by sources at this hour.
Yeah, I want to talk about the suspect here. What do we know right now about him?
Yeah, at this point, we know that he is out of Colorado Springs. In fact, at this hour, the FBI is executing a search warrant at a townhouse associated with Livelsberger. We know that he is a member of the U.S. Army, was supposed to be on active duty, but was on leave. Two relatives spoke to CBS News, and they had no idea that he was involved in the incident that transpired here in the valet area of the Trump Hotel. But we were told that he did, in fact, rent that Cybertruck in recent days, but we're also told that his wife had no idea where he was in the last several days.
All right, a lot of unanswered questions. Andres Gutierrez in Las Vegas, thank you. Well, coming up, the deadly attack in New Orleans has sent shockwaves around the U.S. Up next, I'll speak with a former NYPD detective about how local law enforcement responds after incidents like this. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following for you. A firework explosion in Hawaii killed at least 3 people and hurt at least 24. The state's governor compared the force of the explosion to a bomb. Authorities say a partygoer lit a bundle of aerial fireworks which then fell on its side, setting off crates of additional fireworks. Supporters of South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol held a rally near his residence after a court approved a warrant for his arrest. He was suspended from power and impeached after his decision to impose martial law in the country. Protesters held "Stop the Steal" signs at the rally. Yoon wrote in a letter to supporters that he will, quote, fight to the end. And the NYPD is investigating a mass shooting outside a nightclub in Queens overnight that left at least 10 people injured. It happened as partygoers waited to get into a private event honoring a known gang member who was killed last year. Investigators say 2 or 3 suspects walked up to the crowd and started shooting. Those suspects, by the way, still at large. Back now to our top story and that New Year's Day terror attack in New Orleans. The National Guard is now on the scene, along with local investigators and the FBI. Joining me now is Felipe Rodriguez. He's a former NYPD detective sergeant and an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Felipe, thank you so much for joining us. First off, what's the latest you're hearing about the case?
Well, we're seeing now the case is expanding. Evidence has been recovered at the scene with the additional improvised explosive devices show that, he did have accomplices. Now it's going to be a forensics chase and a quick investigation. We need to try to get those other individuals before maybe they're planning some other sort of terrorist incident. And now with what happened in Las Vegas, we see that things are going, there's multiple connections here, both for in the military. There's a lot of different pieces to this puzzle that we're going to have to try to get put into place very quickly. And
speaking of that, the FBI is now the lead on this investigation. In your experience, do investigations like this become more complicated when the FBI takes over?
It doesn't. We're used to working hand in hand. NYPD, we have Joint Terrorist Task Force. We have individuals that are stationed throughout the entire country, assigned to the Intelligence Division, to make sure that we get real-time information when it has to do with any sort of terrorist-related incidents that might occur. We're used to working with them. They have the resources, and they have some level of expertise that we're definitely going to need as a local agency.
Now, no police department in the world possibly has more experience dealing with protecting a city from terror than the NYPD. So talk to us about security preparations for big events like New Year's Eve. What happens when something slips through the cracks?
This could happen to any agency. As we see in New Orleans, they had some issue with the bullards and some sort of protection that was kind of missing. And for NYPD, we do this well in advance. It's almost as soon as New Year's Eve goes down, we have a debriefing. And then from there, we already start looking at how to make things safer for the following year. And we consult constantly with, our federal and local law enforcement agencies. And we actually bring in even recruits from the academy. We assign them to large-scale incidents like we did for New Year's Eve this year. So it's a complex thing, and it takes, months and months of planning.
You mentioned the bollards. I want to ask about that. Critics have focused a lot on those protective bollards. Now, look, in this case in New Orleans, there were police cruisers parked in places where the bollards were not installed yet, and the attacker drove around them. So what do you make of this debate? What do you think we should be discussing when we talk about protecting places like this?
Well, you kind of have to start from scratch. Bollards are just like big, giant pieces of concrete or metal barriers, and they do stop a vehicle from impacting or going into certain areas. In New York City, we actually use giant pieces of just blocks of concrete. So there's many different ways that, you could try to prevent the vehicle from jumping on the sidewalk. What we have now is the fact that they used a block of vehicle, and it looks like it wasn't completely covering the area. What happened in New Orleans, the vehicle was able to go around it. They're saying that the checkpoints, the barriers, the metal barricades at the time were out for service. So once again, we have to think outside the box and maybe they should have implemented either an additional vehicle or attempted to use these giant concrete cinder blocks like we use in New York.
Do we need to start looking at putting bollards on sidewalks now?
Bollards, like I said, they do stop vehicles. I'm a bigger fan of giant planters. You'll see some of the buildings in New York City, the planters are put into place. And it's twofold, which a lot of people don't realize. One, it stops the vehicle from going onto the sidewalk and possibly injuring people. And it also dissipates the force of an explosion if one were to take place. So, yeah, we are going to have to analyze and look at either large-scale events that we have or venues that might be, under some sort of terrorist threat. Any Trump-related building at this time I would consider a high risk. So we do have to assess everything on a daily basis.
All right, Felipe Rodriguez, thanks so much for joining us. I want to bring in CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Skanga for more on the investigation in New Orleans. Now, the Sugar Bowl was postponed until today after yesterday's attack. How prepared are city officials to host big events moving forward? We're talking about the Super Bowl. We're talking about Mardi Gras. Are they ready for that?
Yeah, the Super Bowl, Mardi Gras, Jazz Fest, and you heard the chief of police of New Orleans today saying that the city, as we speak, is hardening some of its softer targets. They have 400 officers on the ground on top of course, FBI, which is lead for the investigation. The governor announcing just yesterday that in addition, he has called on a military police company, an additional 100 officers there, plus issued that emergency declaration for the state, which allows, state law enforcement and federal law enforcement really to descend upon the city in the weeks and days leading up to the Super Bowl, leading up to Mardi Gras. We should note, you were talking just there with Felipe Rodriguez about some of the bollards. There was a street security project that had been underway ahead of the Super Bowl in order to help enhance some of the security there. Some of the bollards that had been installed in previous years under Mayor Landrieu, they were malfunctioning routinely, and there had been public works memos in the city sort of flagging this. And so we're told that that construction project to place new protective security barriers will be completed by the time of the Super Bowl. One more thing here, we should note that the Super Bowl is always what's called a national special security event. That is the highest level of protection that the federal government provides. Homeland Security Investigations, which is an agency under the Department of Homeland Security, is lead here, and they will have hundreds of officers. Really, there will be thousands of officers there in total, because the FBI, CBP, the U.S. Secret Service will also be there, along with state police and law enforcement, from across the country that helps out. This is an event similar to the inauguration, which we are also expected to see later this month. But of course, all of these events not happening in a vacuum. Law enforcement on high alert and disseminating new information, nationwide, so that other cities around the country can also prepare for their big events too.
All right, Nicole Skanga, thanks so much for joining us. We want to switch gears now and talk about weather. I want to bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore for the first look at our national forecast. Grant?
Hey, good morning. Yeah, starting off, look, it's the new year and new weather. It certainly feels that way across the country as we start to look across the country. We've got lake effect snow ongoing, where we're talking about feet of snow up across the Great Lakes states. We've got another little weather maker moving across the country. This one's moving out towards the East Coast, get some snow to the Northeast tomorrow. But also, you've got this ongoing onslaught of more Pacific Ocean systems moving into the Northwest, and that will continue to be a weather maker and a weather headline grabber as we head through the coming days. Let's talk about across the country first here, where we've got chilly conditions across the Southeast. Atlanta only at 51 degrees this afternoon. That lake effect snow, we'll talk about that in a second, across portions of the Great Lakes. Mild across the desert Southwest with rain and high elevation mountain snow back into the northern Rockies. Lake effect snow, yeah, feet of snow possible in upstate New York, 4 to 8 inches of snow there in northwestern Pennsylvania, even Michigan seeing some of that lake effect snow continuing over the next couple of days. Meanwhile, forecast models showing the West Coast will continue to deal with that low elevation rain with the high elevation mountain snow as we make our way through the coming days, with several systems continuing to move inland. In fact, it's as those storm systems move inland that as it moves into that colder air that's beginning to settle into the northeastern part of the United States, these storm systems are now starting to take on a different form, and that's starting to look more like winter storms as opposed to just severe storms like what we saw a couple of days ago. This takes us into Sunday. You start to see that low pressure system tap into some of that Gulf of Mexico moisture, producing quite a bit of snowfall across the Midwestern states. That moves east into the Ohio Valley, eventually into the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. This is going to be a real important thing to watch, will be the track of that low pressure system as we make our way into Monday for who sees the snow and who just gets in on the rain as we go into the beginning of next week. But I'll tell you, look, the Arctic air, this cold winter air, it is here and it is here to stay. Several rounds of these Arctic impulses dropping in from the north as we make our way through the next several weeks. I think it's the first half of January. Most of the eastern half of the United States will be running well below normal. Back to you.
All right, Grant Gilmore, thanks. The country continues to celebrate the life and legacy of former President Jimmy Carter. Coming up, a look at funeral preparations. We'll be right back. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Final arrangements are being made for the funeral of former President and Nobel Peace Prize recipient Jimmy Carter. Saturday, a motorcade will travel through his hometown of Plains, Georgia, taking him to lie in repose at the Carter Center in Atlanta. On Tuesday, he'll lie in state at the U.S. Capitol ahead of a state funeral at the Washington National Cathedral. He'll then be flown back to Georgia for his burial. Let's bring in CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry, who's in Atlanta with more details. Skylar, just a few days ago, it seemed that the death of Jimmy Carter would be the top story. Of course, that's changed with the tragic events in New Orleans. But as we prepare for the former president's funeral, what's the mood where you are in Georgia?
Hey, Michael, good to be with you as always. Well, what we have heard from people who have come here to pay their respects over the course of the last several days is one filled with grief, but also pride. Just in the last several hours, we received a statement from the Carter Center and a statement from the Carter family saying that the outpouring of love and support from all around the world confirms what we have already known all along, and that Jimmy Carter's family extends far beyond blood relatives, and we are sincerely grateful for everyone's words of comfort. As it relates to the posture here, security-wise, around the Carter Center, we are seeing things be built up ahead of Saturday's public remembrance here at the center. We see Atlanta police vehicles blocking off certain parts of the area, as well as other mitigation measures that have been put in place. But we have also seen people continue to come here to drop off flowers, take their pictures in front of the Carter Center sign that you see behind me as well, all saying that they wanted to pay tribute to the man that meant so much, not only to the state of Georgia, but for around the world.
And Skylar, the president's final farewell has been tightly choreographed. Will we see an impact by recent events of the past few days?
Well, after speaking with sources inside of the Atlanta Police Department, there was already a heightened sense of security here in the city because of several different events. New Year's Eve, the college football playoff game that happened here at the nearby Mercedes-Benz Stadium in the city of Atlanta, and then obviously knowing what is going to be happening here in Atlanta with the public remembrance for President Carter in the next couple of days. They say that they have already had a heightened sense of security, and just the fact that there's going to be a championship college football playoff game happening here in the next several weeks as well. And so police on every level, state, local, and throughout the city, all say that they will be continuing to be on high alert, and that is with measures that you both see and you don't see. We've seen some reports of bomb-sniffing dogs around the stadium. We have seen more officers being called on patrol in and around the city. But as you pointed out, Michael, this is going to be a choreographed measure and a series of events that start out down in Americus, Georgia, then the Plains, and then here to Atlanta, and then obviously all the way up to Washington, D.C., where they are anticipating several high-profile, large-capacity events. January 6th, the funeral for President Carter, and then obviously the inauguration on January 20th. And so I think law enforcement officials on every single level certainly stepping up.
All right. Well, Skylar Henry, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We will continue to follow the latest in the aftermath of that deadly New Orleans terror attack. After the break, what we're learning about the victims. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Well, yesterday, the Orleans Parish District Attorney spoke to CBS News about the state, local, and federal teams working on the investigation into this terror attack.
You're going to see a level of coordination that you probably don't see anywhere else in the country in terms of national, state, and local investigators and prosecutors working to hold every single person that played any role in this attack accountable. I mean, this attack was clearly intended to harm a lot more people. This truck was used as an odious weapon. He opened fire after the truck could not move anymore. He had bombs ready to hurt other people. The only reason there wasn't more loss of life was because of the quick work of the men and women of the New Orleans Police Department. They ran to that danger. They neutralized it quickly before he could cause more harm. And they're heroes. I have to say that they're heroes, and I'm thankful for them.
And as the FBI continues its investigation into the Bourbon Street terror attack, family and friends of some of the 15 people killed are coming forward with their stories. Our Alicia Reed has more.
Friends and family have started identifying their loved ones who were killed during the New Year's attack on Bourbon Street. They include Nakira Cheyenne Dedeaux, Nicole Perez, Tiger Besh, and Reggie Hunter.
Over the middle, wide open, Tiger Besh. First catch of the season for Besh.
Besh was on Princeton's football team, wearing the number 7 jersey. The All-Ivy League kick returner played for the Tigers from 2016 to 2018. In a statement, Besh's former coach says in part, he was a Tiger in every way, a ferocious competitor with endless energy, a beloved teammate, and a caring friend. Their last conversation was about how proud he was of Besh's success, who was currently employed by Seaport Global in New York City. Besh's younger brother Jack posting to social media, "Love you always, brother. You inspired me every day. Now you get to be with me in every moment. I got this family, T. Don't worry. This is for us." Tonight, a prayer service was held for Tiger Besh at the St. Thomas More High School Chapel in Lafayette. The Louisiana native played there before heading to college. 37-year-old father of 2, Reggie Hunter, is from Baton Rouge and worked as a store manager. His cousin says the family last heard from him minutes after midnight when he wished everyone a happy new year in the family group chat. He's remembered as full of life, always laughing and joking. He was out celebrating with his cousin Kevin Ball, who was injured and remains hospitalized. 27-year-old Nicole Perez was a store manager in Louisiana. Her friend and boss says she was a good-hearted person, a smart and dedicated employee. She leaves behind a 4-year-old son. Nakira Cheyenne Dedeaux's mother posted her loss on social media, with Dedeaux wearing a graduation cap and gown from 2024.
That was Alicia Reed reporting. Now you're seeing a live look in New Orleans. We are expecting a news conference from the FBI in just over a half hour from now. We'll have that and continuing coverage from New Orleans coming up in just a few minutes. But right now I want to bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the last look at the national forecast. Grant, how's it looking out there?
Hey, I'll tell you what, looking like January, looking like the new year where we look across the country, got some chilly conditions across the southeast. You got lake effect snow going across the Great Lakes, and then those Pacific storms will continue to inundate the Pacific Northwest as we head through the next couple of days. One system that we're going to be watching as we head through the weekend is going to be a developing low pressure system coming in from the west coast, really digs into the central plains and taps into that Gulf of Mexico moisture. That'll bring a lot of snow to portions of the Midwest and to the Northeast as we head through the weekend into early next week. All right, back to you.
All right, Grant Gilmore, thanks. That does it for me, but stay right where you are after the break. Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.